Vice President Professor Yemi Osinbajo has called for an increase in the number of beneficiaries of the Survival Fund under the federal government's Economic Sustainability Plan, ESP. The Economic Sustainability Plan is a 2.3 trillion naira stimulus package, but put in place to help small businesses weather the impact of COVID-19. Professor Osinbajo says, with this kind of impact and interest already generated among Nigerians by the ongoing implementation of the plan, there was a need to expand the scope and reach of the benefits to a large number of people, commending the committee's members for their efforts in impacting the lives of beneficiaries. The Vice President says the partnership with the private sector in the implementation of the scheme was notable. The payroll support scheme has paid close to 350,000 beneficiaries. Almost 166,000 of 300,000 artisans are benefited from the Artisan and Transport Scheme, and the Corporate Affairs Commission is ramping up numbers to register 250,000 new businesses free of charge. That's according to the statement. The Central Bank of Nigeria says it will charge protection fees from investors in its non-interest assets-backed securities. The Apex Bank revealed that it will now charge Wakala fees as one of the CBN's non-interest assets-backed securities. Legally, Wakala refers to a contract in which a person who has legal capacity authorizes another to conclude a certain well-defined permissible contract on behalf of that person. CBN plans to charge 10% of the underlying return from 1 to 30 days investment, 7.5% for 31 days to 90 days, 5% for 91 days to 180 days, and 2.5% for 181 days to 365 days. The circular covering the draft framework signed by the Director of Financial Markets Department, Angela Ejembi, stated that the increased investments in Sukuk issued by the multilateral organization and rising participation of non-interest financial institutions at the CBN window has made it mandatory that the CNI ABS to be operationalized. The Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry has projected that the Nigerian economy will grow by 1% in 2021. The projection, which was contained in the recently released LCCI's Economic and Business Review for the year 2020, an outlook for 2021, reveals that recovery from current recession will depend on the performance of oil prices in international markets and local crude oil production level in 2021. According to the Chamber, the growth outlook for 2021 will take full course most likely in the second quarter due to the base effect of the second quarter of 2020, when output contracted steeply by 6.1%. The LCCI also expected that headline inflation will remain high in 2021 as combinations of food supply shocks, foreign exchange policies, higher energy costs, foreign exchange scarcity, and heightened insecurity in major food producing states will continue to mount pressure on domestic consumer prices. However, in the month of November, the Central Bank of Nigeria, which had played lead role in combating against the ravaging economic fallout from COVID-19, projected 2% economic growth in the coming 2021. That's coming year. With the assurance that the country will come out of recession by the first quarter of 2021, with these projections, the big question now is, with the trial of the second wave of COVID-19, rising inflation, and existing economic recession, what measures should be taken to achieve quick economic recovery? Quick, if we're going to have anything quick at all. Well, I have joining me live in the studio to answer these questions and, of course, more on this very important report. He's the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Yusuf.
Thank you very much.
And compliments of the season again.
Same to you.
First, I want to know what were the fundamentals adopted in putting together this very beautiful document. I was reading today, it was almost like a handout. I was able to jot and get a lot out of it. So what was put into consideration when you were putting all of this together?
Well, the factors that were put into consideration were both the external and domestic factors, because these are the two major factors that have been driving performance of the economy. They are also the two major components of variables that have been impacting on business performance. Okay. Now, the external sector was driven largely as you know, by the COVID development and how that impacted on the totality of the macroeconomic environment, how it impacted on commodity prices, and you know how strategic or how critical commodity prices is to the Nigerian economy, especially from the perspective of the impact on oil. We saw what that did to the foreign reserves, what that is currently doing to the exchange rate, and you know how sensitive the Nigerian economy is to exchange rate development. And it's also affected revenue. So from the external sector, we had very serious impacts on our macroeconomic fundamentals from the point of view of the GDP performance, the point of view of revenue, and the point of view of foreign exchange earnings. And of course, that impacted directly on the exchange rate. And that again affected the inflationary situation. So a major factor that actually impacted both the business performance and the general economic performance was the external factor. Okay. Then, of course, there was the domestic angle to it, because the kind of response we had to the developments in the external sector also, to some extent, further compounded the problem. You know, in dealing with the COVID, I think the first wave of COVID, we had this massive restriction, which practically crippled the entire domestic economy. We also had the lockdown. Some critical sectors were locked down for almost 8 months. And many of these sectors were sectors that were actually job generating. They were labor intensive, and it affected a whole lot of small businesses. So these were the things that, of course, we also had policy issues, policy responses, for instance, from the foreign exchange, the way the whole foreign exchange market was being managed, the challenge of the multiple windows and the challenges that these things were creating, the liquidity crisis, which affected access to foreign exchange, both by manufacturers and those who are in the distributive trade sector. Then, of course, we had the challenge with the ports. You can see how that is even trending even more now. It has been a very, very difficult situation right from the beginning of the year. It has always been like that anyway. Unfortunately, we haven't seen any major intervention that could change the narrative as far as the port situation is concerned. You know, and that has affected productivity, it has affected output, it has also affected cost. Because for many of these cargoes that are stuck in the port, we had issues of people, of course, who have borrowed money to do those imports. We also have issues of demurrage that accumulates. In all of these things, at the end of the day, impact the general price level. So it is the common people, the average person, the average consumer, that invariably pays for all of these things. And it's a very big problem, which we are hoping that the government will do something urgently about. There have been a lot of issues. First, we have issues with the processes within the port. That is, processes, documentation, the multiple checkpoints within the port, the multiple desks that importers have to interface with. And all of these things, you know, have their own problems that they create. Then there are also issues, apart from the customs, we have issues with the terminal operators, there are issues with the shipping companies. All of these, you know, segments pose different levels of challenges for importers. And all of these things impose a lot of burden on businesses. Then there are issues outside of the ports. Outside the ports, there are issues of the multiple checkpoints by the strike force, by the FOU, and all these
after leaving
issues.
the ports,
after leaving
now
the ports,
get outside the port and you're being stopped again.
Stopped again. Then another round of checking will commence. You know, so all these things create or created serious problems for businesses. Then there is the fact that there is very little application of technology. Within the ports, I mean, this is the biggest economy in Africa. You have seen it even from your reports.
Yes.
The economy is big. And that will reflect on the flow of trade, import and export. Granted, we do more of import than exporting. Now you have a situation where you still examine cargoes manually. So if you have 1,000 cargo or 2,000 cargo in a day. You have to examine everything manually. These are major bottlenecks to productivity in the economy. Then we have been talking about issues of single window, doing all these transactions online. We have been on that for close to 5 years or more. As I speak to you, there is still a lot of human interface. So there are all sorts of forces working against the reform of the system. So it takes very strong political will to ensure that something is done. Because it is one thing for you to fix the macroeconomic environment. It's another thing for you to get businesses functioning properly. As a result of the activities of some key agencies of government, as a result of some facilities that need to be put in place, and all of that. Look at the issue of the access road to the ports.
Oh.
Just yesterday, the governor was there to see. The vice president has been there. Yeah. We have been given all sorts of timelines, ultimatum, and yet these things. So we need very strong political will to make sure that these things.
None of these, DG, response from various national governments, monetary authorities cannot also be ruled out. We've seen what's happened from the monetary side, talking about the central bank. A lot of money has been thrown into for SMEs and for all of this. Now, what impact would you say this has really had? Because many say throw money at some of all of these problems. But the central bank has been like, we need to just make this work, lend into the real sector and all of this. What impact would you say this has really had?
Well, it has had some measure of impact. Because if you talk to those who are in business, particularly the large corporates and those who are at the middle level of the hierarchy, they will tell you that financing has improved.
Okay.
As I speak to you, we have, for prime lending rates, for instance, coming close to 12%, 13%. And some of these corporates are able to access funds at maybe 13%, 14%, as against what we used to have, talk of 18%, 20%. So the liquidity generally in the financial system has improved. But you may not say that much for the SMEs, because they have bigger challenges of access. And because they have a challenge of access, invariably the risk of lending to them is high, because some of the things that some of these banking institutions require for them to access the funds, most SMEs find it difficult to meet it. So because of that, you see a lot of migration of SMEs to microfinance banks, to money lenders, to finance houses, and all of that. And when you go through those windows, the rates are much higher.
Yes.
They could charge you 5% per month. They could charge you 6% per month, depending on how desperate you are. By the time you annualize that, you'll be talking of maybe 25, 30, 40%. So for the SMEs, it's still a challenge. But generally, the liquidity in the economy has improved. But liquidity alone cannot solve the problem. And the central bank itself has always emphasized this point at the end of each of its monetary policy committee meeting, that the fiscal authorities need to complement the efforts of the monetary authorities. That is where you can have the right kind of outcome. Now, a lot of funds have been given to those in agriculture. Look at what is happening to security. Only recently we heard the stories of farmers who were murdered. These are people who possibly have even taken some of this anchor borrowers program and things like that. And without security, what can you do? So security is now becoming even a very big critical factor in the business environment equation as we speak. And unfortunately, there are no indications that we have very clear strategy
to
address it, because the situation keeps deteriorating. And if you don't have security, how do you want people to invest? Apart from the perception problem that it creates for the economy as a whole. Then we have the issue of the structural issues, the structural environment. Of course, the government has been doing its best trying to fix railways, but the deficit is huge.
Huge.
When you relate the deficit to the appropriation that we give to these key ministries for infrastructure, it's peanut. Because the allocation to transportation and works, even in the recent budget of 2021, I'm not sure it's up to 10%. And these are the critical, one of the most important issues that we need to address. Because if you are talking of building an economy that is sustainable, that is competitive, we need to fix this infrastructure. And it is not something that the private sector can easily jump into. Because the risk profile is high, especially in this environment. So government has a major responsibility. If governments, even in the advanced economies, are still aggressively developing and investing in infrastructure, what less of a country like Nigeria? So the structural issues around roads, around energy, around all of these things are very important for us to be able to get the right kind of outcomes from all the efforts of the monetary authorities. Then the policy environment also needs to be right. I've talked about the FX environment. We need to eliminate all these multiple windows as much as possible. Our trade policy, we also need to be very strategic about trade policy, because it's not something that we often discuss, but it's very important. You have to be strategic in what products you impose high tariff on.
And those that you want.
And those that you want. You need to be strategic on products that you impose a complete ban on. And if you are protecting an economy, you have to build domestic capacity. If you are protecting and increasing tariffs and imposing bans, and you are not supporting the capacity for domestic production to fill those gaps, you create a lot of problems for the citizens. And you aggravate the problem of poverty. So we have to be strategic in the combination of policies, so that in 2021, we don't have to go through what we are going through now.
It should be seamless.
Yes. So we look at all these policy environments, we look at the institutions, we look at structural issues. Of course, the structural issues are not something that you can fix very quickly. But you must see a clear strategy towards it. It's not something that you want to do and begin to talk about federal character. That because you have fixed one road in one region, you have to fix the same amount of kilometers of road in another region. We have to look at it and look at how this economy as a whole can benefit from investment in infrastructure. And we have to be very strategic. Because if the economy is growing, everybody will benefit. If the economy is in a crisis, everybody suffers, no matter where you are. So we have to be, the focus has to be clear as to how we approach the issue of infrastructure. Because without infrastructure, there cannot be production that is competitive. Now we are talking about CFTA. It's coming up
January 1st.
And
just a few days' time.
How will you trade and get a proper reward from trade if you are not producing and producing competitively?
True.
So we run a lot of risk. Risk of not being competitive. Of course, there are opportunities in CFTA, but there are also risks. There are also challenges that these things are going to throw up. So these are the things that we need to look at fundamentally to ensure that this economy is much better than what it is. And we have what it takes. We have the entrepreneur. We have everything. And if you get it right, we will have investors. We will be able to attract finance.
Now, DG, this is some of what we've been grappling with: subdued economic growth, falling income per capita, rising inflation, external vulnerabilities, and all of that. Now, they say situations like this, sometimes you need some aggressive or decisive solutions. We saw removal of subsidies, at least on PMS. We also saw introduction of cost-reflective tariff for the electricity sector, energy sector, and also the PIB now being transmitted. I think, what would you say take us through what you think of all of these moves?
Well, these are very important and critical reforms. And of course, these reforms are coming rather late, but it's better late than never. The deregulation of the downstream sector, politically, is not so popular.
It's not.
But it is the way to go. I understand the position of government on some of these things, because you also don't put a policy in place in a vacuum. Policies are meant for human beings, and you have to take into consideration the social factor even in the implementation or in the conceptualization of policy. So government has announced the deregulation, but it's not easy to push through very aggressively because of the pushback from the people.
Yes.
Because you have to put everything in context. There's a whole lot of poverty in the land. There's a large measure of discontent about how hard, how difficult things are. So some of these reforms, you have to also push it cautiously, which is what I think the government is doing. So the government is on the right path, but you must also recognize that because of the social environment, because of the poverty situation, government has to tread softly. Okay. So I understand the point of government. On the cost-reflective tariff, of course, that is the way to go. Again, there's a social context to that because it's a chicken and egg situation. The consumers complain that there is no electricity and you want to increase tariff.
They want more tariff.
The companies are saying that you have to increase the tariff before they can provide the electricity. Yes. So there are sound arguments on both sides. But of course, a major step has been taken.
Yes, yes. And
I believe that we should begin to see improvements. And I also reckon that we already begin to see some slight improvements around the issue of electricity. So that is also key because the energy situation also presents a huge opportunity for investment. Huge. Not just from the regular or conventional energy sources, even from other sources of energy, like renewable, like solar and all of these things. It's a whole lot of opportunities. Because you can't have an economy as big as this, and you are still talking about 5,000 megawatts, 4,000 megawatts. You know, it's not, it doesn't add up.
It doesn't.
So it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. But we need to create the right kind of policy environment for investors to tap into that opportunity. A step has been taken about the cost-reflective tariff. That's very important to sustain investment in that sector. We need to go a lot further to address the issue of the renewable energy and other energy sources. We need to crash the import tariffs around all the things we need to promote renewable energy. This is not the time to say that you want to generate revenue from solar equipment, from solar batteries, from all the equipment that you need for renewable. You should crash all those tariffs. We should remove all those levies so that more investment can take place and we can make the renewable much more affordable. Right now, they are very difficult. They are very difficult to access. They are very expensive. They are expensive partly first because of the foreign exchange factor.
Yes.
And secondly, on top of that, you have very high tariffs on them. So as a strategy to improve energy access, this is a policy matter.
It is.
It's a low-hanging fruit. Just remove the tariffs. What is the contribution of those revenue to even the total revenue? It's negligible. So you remove those tariffs so that we can have better access. It is not compulsory that everybody has to hook up to national grids. In the villages, in the rural areas, even in some communities, even within the city. If your energy requirement is not so high, you can just hang your solar there and go ahead with your life. So these are ways to put policies in place. It's not everything that you throw money at. Policies and the regulation also have a big role to play to make sure that the economy runs well.
Very interesting discussion here. Just in 1 minute, I know it might not be possible, but let's try and just read in 1 minute. Let's look at our outlook for 2021. What are we looking at? COVID, resurgence, AFCFTA? Just do an overview and let's wrap it up on that note.
Well, unfortunately, we have the resurgence of COVID. That may further slow us down. It may further prolong the recession, unfortunately. Of course, we have the vaccine, but again, there's a whole lot of debate even around the vaccine. And right now, even in terms of access, we don't even have a budget for that yet. There's still a lot of discussion around how much it will cost and all of that. So if we still continue to have the hangover of this COVID in 2021, then recovery may be difficult.
Of course.
We may be looking at maybe the second quarter or third quarter because governments are now talking about locking down some sectors, restrictions and all of that. And these are sectors that have suffered in the last 1 year. Now, this is the season for them to even recoup some things. The lockdown is now being brought back. So it's going to be very slow in terms of the recovery. In terms of the policy environment, I don't see much changing for as long as we have the current structural government. The foreign exchange policy is not likely to change. Some of our trade policies is not likely to also change. The structural problems are not things that we can fix immediately. So for investors generally, it is better to assume that these variables will remain constant for 2021, so that we build our business model around those assumptions, so that there will be no surprise. If there are positive surprises, fine. But it's better to work with the scenario that some of these challenges will remain: energy, the state of the roads, the forex problem, security problem, and all of that. So you construct a model as business people, as investors, around it, so that we can have our strategy for 2021, strategy for survival.
Dr. Muda Yusuf, I must thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate this. It's always nice having you on the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You've heard it from